Hi, this is Joe Folkman, and welcome to the webinar on restoring resilience. We're excited to have you here today. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Jack Zenger. Jack, how are you today?
I'm doing really well.
Well, we're seeing some changes, and we're excited, but we're also interested in this whole issue of resilience. And one of the things I've been noticing is I've been watching my wife. And she's a very resilient person. She has been through a lot of very difficult times and always bounces back. But I've noticed a real change here. This is a huge thing we're going through right now. And it's affected her, and it's affected my daughters and also my son. Well, we can see it, and for most of the problems we've encountered in her life, it seems like our solution was to work harder, push harder, be smarter, just bully that problem away. But in this case, it just doesn't work. We've had to back up and stay away and social distance. If there ever was a need or a time where resilience was recommended, it's now. And the conventional wisdom about how to be more resilient doesn't seem to work. We've been measuring resilience for several years, and we've noticed a significant decline. So we did some research, we've got some data, and we think we have a winning solution for how to restore resilience. Now, the agenda for today is we'll talk about what resilience is and why it should be important. The impact of resilience, it's huge. And it's going to make a big difference for you personally, and in your organization, it's going to make a big difference. We're then going to give you the results from your self-assessment and talk about them. Next, we're going to talk about these enabling behaviors. These are behaviors that help to restore resilience. And unlike some webinars where you just sit back and listen, we're going to ask you to participate. Select one of those enabling behaviors, create a plan for improvement, and then follow up on that plan. We're going to give you a development guide to help you in that process. Now, if you haven't done the self-assessment, you can do it by going to the link bit.ly/ZFBewell. It only takes about 10 minutes to complete that. So, Jack, talk about the early research on resilience.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So once again, the objective of today's webinar, is to help you become a more resilient person. You know, this is a relatively new term in the HR lexicon. It was about 30 years ago that there was a research paper published by a woman named Emmy Werner, who had conducted a longitudinal study of children born in a poor community in Hawaii. And she found that the parents of the children were unemployed and they had very significant substance abuse problems, and that about 2/3 of the children of these parents exhibited very self-destructive behavior in their teens, but 1/3 did not. And she referred to those teens as resilient. And that's indeed the first reference we noticed in the literature using this term. So what exactly do we mean? And chances are we all have our own kind of perceptions of what this phrase or this term means. But let us just, for sake of all being on the same page, it is the ability for a person to kind of experience some stressful situation and to remain calm in that, to take control of it and to take positive steps to be able to move forward when facing this crisis or significant change. And certainly that describes our world today. Control is increased when a person reacts in a positive way, obviously, that will enable them to improve or enhance their situation. Now, it was interesting in 2014, there was a book published that looked at two interesting terms, and those were stress and anxiety. And I guess I must confess I'd never thought particularly about the difference between those two, but for purposes of our dialogue today, let's kind of follow their lead. Stress is that feeling that we all have inside, which is a response to some threatening situation that we face. Anxiety is sort of our reaction to the stress that we have. It is wrapped very much around our fear about something that will happen or might happen in the future. And so I just found it interesting to kind of see this distinction between the idea of stress and anxiety.
So my nightmares are anxiety, right, Jack? I've been having
right.
some
They're a reaction to your stress.
very bad dreams.
That's true. That's true. So there are four factors that we have kind of identified that seem to be wrapped around this notion of reducing resilience. What are those forces that tend to diminish our ability to be resilient? One is certainly an uncertain future. And that is obviously something that virtually everyone faces in this world today. No one knows for certain how this is all going to play out. Wrapped around that, and kind of the consequence of that, is that we feel this enormous lack of control. And as Joe said earlier, for most of life's challenges, we've felt we could kind of just overcome them by working harder, by working more intelligently, by putting in more hours. In this case, we have no control. And those indeed then bring this stress that we feel, which then leads to this pervasive anxiety that gets wrapped around it.
And that in turn lowers resilience, right, Jack?
And those lower resilience.
One of the interesting articles we read was by Al Siebert, and he talked about these overreactions to the current situation and to negative circumstances. And he went through 3: fight, flight. He actually didn't talk about freeze, but I actually think it's more important here. I'm seeing more people freezing in this circumstance where they can't move. It's just like I'm standing still. And these are overreactions. And what his thought is that when you're in these modes, you tend to blame others, you tend to get very upset, you overreact. And when you do that, and we've seen a lot of that, haven't we?
That's right. And the old fight and flight's been around for a long time, but the addition of freeze is a very useful kind of observation. And certainly, we see a lot of HR departments that kind of get frozen. They just don't know what to do, and so they do nothing. And
and even the protests now, isn't that fascinating that people, and you kind of go, we're trying to help. But you see that. The interesting fourth reaction there is frustration. And his point was, if you're feeling frustrated, that's good. I mean, and I'm thinking, wow, really? But he says frustration, becoming upset or worried or anxious, it helps us move forward. So if you're there, that helps, but all those things really affect our resilience. Now, we measured resilience in 3 different ways. First, we did it with a self-assessment. You filled out that self-assessment, and so you've got a good sense about that. And then we did 360 assessments. We had 2 different indexes where we measured resilience. One was a very focused index. Cease failure is a temporary setback, is able to make decisions and continually move forward, and that's that control kind of issue, and maintains a positive attitude, sense of opportunity during periods of turbulence. That's a very focused index. We had data on about 500 leaders on that index. And then we had a very broad index, 8 items. And this broad index really gets at a whole bunch of these endpoints of resilience, and it brings it together in a very good way. But we found both of those were very valid. We're going to show you results from both indices here and show you what we found in terms of resilience. And first, we're going to talk about the impact on you. And actually, Jack, this really surprised me how much impact resilience had on an individual. What we did is we looked at people who were below the 75th percentile on resilience, and then we looked at the overall leadership effectiveness rating, which is the overall how you're perceived as a leader. And we found that if you're below the 75th percentile on resilience, Your leadership effectiveness rating was at the 40th percentile, but if you're in the top quartile on resilience, you actually are at the 81st percentile on overall leadership effectiveness. So being resilient has a 2x influence over the effectiveness of leaders. And I think this is true of individual contributors. What we're saying here is resilience can have a very devastating negative effect on you as an individual. What about the organization? What about the team? Well, in the team context, what we looked at was the engagement level of direct reports. And so we measured resilience. This is our 500-person data set. And we looked at the bottom 10% on resilience, then the top 10%. And you can see the engagement levels. So leaders who were very unresilient had engagement of their direct reports at the 26th percentile. The most resilient leaders had engagement levels at the 77th percentile. That's a huge difference. So people liked their job more, they were more engaged, they wanted to do more. And then we looked at speed. Now, Jack and I wrote a book on speed. We think it's important, but one of the things I've noticed about what's happening right now is this, we've talked about freeze. And this is exactly freeze here. And so this is a study of 110,000 leaders, and what we're looking at here is resilience ratings and speed. And sure enough, those unresilient leaders they're just crawling along. They're moving incredibly slow, but the most resilient leaders, their speed ratings were at the 91st percentile. Now, if you think about the impact of that in your organization, when you have this going on, everything crawls to a stop. And you think about the preacher on Sunday when he says, "You're damned." Well, this is damned. This is stopped. This is, everything gets delayed. And you know what organizations need right now is to move forward quickly. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about is the impact on the organization. And as you look at resilience here levels and the percentage of people that think about quitting, the least resilient people, over 40%, are thinking about quitting. The most resilient people, our leaders, have only about less than 15% that are thinking about quitting. So, one last study, and that was my big question: is resilience contagious? And I mentioned that my wife had talked a lot to our daughters, and both of my daughters are very resilient. They can accomplish anything, they can do anything. And I did this self-assessment with my wife and my daughters, and my wife's score was -9. My daughter's score were -5. And sure enough. And so what I did is we looked at a data set. This is 25,000 peers. Now, we lined up what we called a primary peer with another peer. In other words, we matched two peers together. And the question is, does resilience of one peer affect another peer? Can you tell the difference? And if there's no effect, then you'd expect to have that group at the 50th percentile. But if you look at the least resilient peers here, this is just peers, the peers they work with, their average resilience is at the 38th percentile. And if they're in the middle 30%, they're at the 50th percentile. And then next 25 up, they're at the 57th percentile. The most resilient peers, the peers they worked with, were at the 68th percentile. Now, what does this mean? Well, in your organization, if you work with a group of people and they're suffering a lot of anxiety, if they're worried a lot, if they're frustrated, if they're slowing down, guess what? You are too. If you're working in an organization where people are saying, we can overcome this, we're going to make it through this, they feel resilient, then you're going to be more resilient. So what we'd anticipate here is in organizations, you're going to find pockets of low resilience and pockets of high resilience. And if you can help people understand how to move forward out of that, I think it's going to help a lot. Jack, any observations of this?
Just that we'll be talking about this once again later on in this webinar today, but here's a case of where it really is contagious, and you just can't overstate that. One of the things that we often talk about is the difference between genders, and in this case, we're happy to say that there's virtually no difference between men and women when it comes to this issue of resilience. On age, there's an interesting kind of phenomenon, as you can see on this chart you're looking at. Younger people tend to be a little less resilient than their older counterparts. As people get older, up to the age of 51 to 55, it keeps going up, then it just drops down a little notch there, and then it begins to go up, so that the older you are, maybe the more experience you've had, you are very resilient.
Either that or you're in good denial. I don't know.
Possibly you're in denial. So as a person who is in his late 80s, obviously the scores, we don't have a lot of data on people my age, but the numbers up there would be very high. People who have survived this long are clearly capable of being very resilient.
And Jack, this really connects with some work done by Angela Duckworth on grit. And she found that same correlation. She found that as people aged, the grit scores were higher.
And the other topic that may be of interest to our listeners today would be what happens in different levels in the organization. And what you see here is that the people who are in the more senior management positions tend to have higher scores than the people who are in the supervisory and down at the individual contributor level. That may be somewhat age-related, a little bit maybe, but it's a phenomenon that resilience seems to increase the higher you go.
Well,
in
and
the organization.
you'd have to say too that those who are resilient tend to be more promotable and tend to be higher performers.
Exactly. And here is a chart that displays the different functional areas in a company, and as you would probably expect, the people who are in the sales role, who face kind of challenges, they face kind of being denied, turned away, being told no. They tend to have higher scores on resilience. I was pleased to see the HR and training scores, that they were at the 54th percentile. And they show a great, a higher level of resilience than many other functional areas.
I remember when I went to sales school for a job when I was in college, Jack, and they taught me to say, every time somebody says no, say, great, that just puts me one closer to a yes. But that's
one step closer.
That's sales mentality, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. This particular study we did, we looked at the attitudes of resilient people. This is our self-assessment. And what we found is that if we compared the most resilient to the least resilient, and again, these are basically if you got a positive score on your resilience or a negative score on your resilience, and then we looked at attitudes. Resilient people tended to respond more positively to the item. I'm more successful when I work with energy and passion. They liked that item more. They were more positive about it. Bothers me when people stick with the same old processes. So they liked innovation. They didn't mind risk. I like to go above and beyond. They push themselves. I'm afraid of missing opportunities. The resilient people were worried, and they're kind of willing to kind of take chances. And I'm effective at identifying changes that need to be made, so more willing to change. And I'm most effective when I'm quick to jump on a high priority issue. So that they weren't stuck, they were moving quickly. So we see a very different attitude between the high resilience and the low resilience on these things. So let's focus on your self-assessment results. This is an assessment that gets at your resilience level and your confidence. And the results can significantly be influenced by recent events, and we've seen that in our data. What this isn't an indication of your competence in these areas. In other words, this is a self-assessment, and others might perceive you as being more resilient and confident than your scores on this particular self-assessment give you. So the resilience score has a scale of -15 to +15. The minus scores tend to indicate a lack of resilience, and the plus scores tend to indicate, the positive scores indicate high resiliency. And again, you can see your score on your output there. We also measured your self-confidence, your confidence that things are going to go well. This scale goes from -5 to +5. So negative numbers indicate a lack of confidence, whereas positive numbers indicate a high level of confidence. We've actually found this to be very predictive of a lot of outcomes. We'll show you that data in a minute. We also gave you a little comparison to the norms. So we give you the average scores, for instance, for resilience, which is 2.28. And then we showed you percentiles at the 10th, 25th, 75th, and 90th percentile. And then the confidence scores, and you can see again the average score and then the 10th, 25th, 75th, and 90th percentile. So you can see how you compare to a larger group of people, in one case about 9,000, in the other case 3,000 people. And that database is getting larger all the time. So negative scores indicate drivers of that: uncertainty, lack of control, stress, and anxiety. The recommendation is you need to rebuild your resilience. You need to find some ways to recapture that. If you had a positive score, it shows confidence, optimism, self-determination. Now, the recommendation is make sure you're accurately assessing what's happening today and the possible risks. It is possible that you might be a little bit more optimistic than you need to be. And whatever your score is, what we've found is that you can build and enhance your resilience by working on these enabling behaviors. Now, one last thing that helps you understand the scores. If your resilience score is negative, then the average confidence score is -1.33. So obviously, low resilience really lowered your confidence. If your resilience score was positive, your average confidence score is 1.91. There is a very direct and significant effect on confidence. And we did a study with 710 leaders. And what we had is we had this self-assessment that measured confidence. And then we had the 360 results, ratings from managers, peers, direct reports, and others. And about 248 had negative confidence scores and 462 had positive confidence scores. What we did is we looked at these average scores, and we found that on a series of competencies, those that had low confidence scores really were rated significantly lower on champions change, innovation, inspires and motivates, connects to the outside world, develops strategic perspective, communicates, establishes stretch goals, and solves problems and analyzes issues. There was a piece of good news there. We actually did find the people with low confidence scores were rated more positively on building relationships. It seems like they would take more time with people and be less worried about hurrying off or whatever, but that was the positive note on that. The point about this is both resilience and confidence have a huge impact. Leaders were twice as effective with high resilience. And you can see that the confidence had a very devastating negative effect on not only attitudes, but performance of individuals. And that is a real significant finding here.
Now, those of you who have followed any of our work in the past know that we're big fans of looking at companion behaviors. That is, behaviors that are statistically significantly correlated with some competency, some capability that you're trying to develop. And so in looking at the companion behaviors to this quality of a resiliency, we found that there were indeed 5 of them. They are a willingness to change, being willing to serve and help other people, utilizing inspirational communications, being open to alternative views, and finally, being trusted by other people. We're going to spend the next few minutes talking about these 5 companion behaviors and what you might do to kind of strengthen this within yourself. The first one, as you recall, was willingness to change. As I look at this is fundamentally a mindset issue. It is your mindset of being open to having the world about you be different tomorrow than it is today. And of any time in our lives when we've needed that ability to be comfortable with the fact that the world is changing, boy, we are in it today.
I think if you surveyed people and said, have you had to change? It's like, yes.
I've had to change a lot, and I think the people who are more realistic recognize it probably is not going to go, it's not going to snap back to the place where it was before exactly. So definitely the world looks different today than it did, in times past, and we need to be willing to kind of have a new view of the world. You need to ask yourself, what do you need to do to adapt to this new reality? What opportunities do you have to improve your skills? Are there some different approaches that you could be using or adopting at this time? Are you willing to take some calculated risks? Are you willing to set a very challenging stretch goal for yourself? And can you comfortably challenge some of the standard approaches that you've been using in the past? And so when it comes to the way we have recreation, to how we get food and prepare food and all the other things, we've all gone through some very interesting changes, and that I believe we're in for some further changes.
Oh, it's going to get worse?
Not worse, but it's going to be different.
Okay.
And the fears that we, have to overcome can best be addressed by, the classic remedy. If you're afraid of something, start in a small way to kind of face that reality. Gradually make changes in your life. Seek other people's support and encouragement. And as Mark Twain observed, courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting in spite of that fear. We all certainly face this combination of stress and anxiety. And I think we all can identify with the fact that it's very easy to conjure up the worst possible outcome and then proceed to stew about that. And lots of us, either have partners or we're close to people or we have a child or we have a parent who is inclined to do that. And we know how irrational that is in a way, but also how common it is. And so managing stress and anxiety requires us to be more flexible, to be kind of more willing to accept ourselves. And here we now bring in these ideas about mindfulness and being willing to acknowledge your own anger, your own disappointment, your own frustration, and to say, okay, let me be clear about what can I control, what can't I control. And I'll take action on those things that I can control. But if I can find some mindfulness techniques that will help me to deal with my anxiety, that can be very, very valuable. there's a rash of good literature today in our popular press about dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression, dealing with the stress that the world is presenting to us right now.
I like that, postpone your worry. It's like that line from Gone with the Wind. I'll think about that tomorrow.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I will think about that tomorrow.
So let's talk about helping and serving others. Who can you help? Helping and serving others makes you feel valued and more relevant. A lot of times when we have a lot of anxiety, we're just inwardly focused. It's all about me. It's all about me and what's going to happen. And oh my gosh, things are bad. And it's so funny when you start helping others, and it just changes your mindset a lot. And people quit sort of focusing in on themselves and they focus out, and it can really, really help. And so can you provide support and encouragement to others when they fail? Can you help others understand a new vision and direction given today's environment? Can you help people understand the unwritten rules that are not obvious? And can you give honest feedback in a helpful way? Helping others really is a great thing to help you through this. One of the things that, as you think about helping others, you may want to start with yourself first. Because if you're in a bad place, you're not going to be much help. So one thing you can do is spend some time with those who help and support you the most and build you up and kind of get you going. But there's a bunch of activities that I think can help, and I know that going for a walk or for a bike ride or something like that really, really helps me, and it gives me time to think and listen. Listening to music can help. Watching a loved movie again. My wife, she's back through all her favorite movies,
Oh, man.
And I said, how many times have you watched that? Now, my personal favorite is Groundhog Day. And the reason I really like that movie is because Bill Murray, in the end, actually decides he can't change his circumstance, so he decides to change himself. And that's the one thing he can change, and which is a great message.
Yeah.
Get regular exercise. Having that food you crave, isn't that wonderful? Reading or listening to an inspiring book. We've got a couple. If you want some recommendations, we'll suggest some. And fix or repair something. Now, just a warning there: if you break it more, that doesn't help. But I've had some disasters on that. But I have fixed some things at the house. Actually, it's fascinating when I see webinars and stuff when people are saying, "My office has never been so clean."
Yeah, that's right.
So they do it. What there is some really interesting research, some good research that really proves the fact that helping and serving others has a significant impact on you and your well-being. So it increases a sense of well-being. It can lower depression. It influences your lifespan, lowers chronic pain, and it even lowers your blood pressure and makes you more happy. And there's some references of that research. So helping others also impacts the bottom line. So here's what I did, Jack. I went through and I identified a series of items in our 360 assessment that had the word helps in it. And I created a helping index. And I didn't care. It was did that item have help in it? And this is our effective at helping others index. And as you look at the percentage of people that think about quitting and helping behavior, it goes from the 49% thinking about quitting down to 13%. Those that help have a significant, fewer of their people want to quit, so you're able to keep your talent. And then I looked at the percentage of people willing to go the extra mile. And this is wonderful. It just goes the opposite direction. Those that are the worst in terms of helping only have about 14% of their people willing to kind of give extra effort, put in extra time, But those who are really good helpers, 66% of their employees are willing to give more discretionary effort, and that really has some influence. So helping really is a profound behavior in terms of its influence in organizations and in your life.
Okay, the third of these companion behaviors that we found really did help to improve your resiliency is talking. Talking with others in an open and friendly way not only helps them, but it helps you feel better and develop a better perspective. And so we would encourage you who, as you saw your own scores on your self-assessment, if you're a person who is pretty self-contained and doesn't need a lot of outside reinforcement and help, you of all people maybe need to kind of take this one to heart, because at this time, your willingness to reach out and communicate with others can really help lift them and build them. It can help you, identify people on your team and in your broader community that need to talk. And so we would encourage you to think about creating a mechanism, a routine, whereby you call people, you email them, you message them, and just stop and think, who among my colleagues needs an opportunity to talk? Who in your network do you need to talk to?
It is funny that in stressful situations, people talk less, not more, oftentimes.
Exactly. That's the instinct. Now, the chart that you see before you is a fascinating one. It was created by two scholars, Nicholas Christakis and a man named James Fowler. And it came out of one of the most famous heart health studies that was ever conducted. It's called the Framingham Heart Study. It happened that their analysis was being done in the city of Framingham in Massachusetts. It went over a 20-year period. But as they were collecting data on people's heart health, they also asked some questions about their happiness. And in retrospect, when they began to analyze their data, they began to see a very fascinating pattern emerging. So what you see on the chart is circles and squares. The circles represent women, and the squares represent men. The lighter blue, the blue color represents people who were happier, and the darker colors represent people who were less happy. And what you see is that there are some very fascinating patterns emerge. You see that there are people who are unhappy are clustered together, and the people who are happy are clustered together. Now, I will tell you that the researchers were intrigued about which comes first. Do happy people tend to move in next door to each other? Or does living next door to a happy person kind of help you to be more happy? And they very much came down based on their research, on the side that it was indeed this topic that Joe talked about earlier. It's contagion. Happy people influence the people who are around them and bring a higher level of happiness. So this ability to have meaningful, positive conversations, to engage in useful dialogue, is one of the things that really can help increase your resilience. Now, one of the things that we've done lately is to take some research that we had done originally around coaching. In the process of creating a book called The Extraordinary Coach, we came up with a model or a framework for having useful, powerful conversations that matter now. And this model presents a pretty universal template to help every conversation be more efficient, to get at a deeper level, to be more productive, to be more impactful on the other person. So we have created some useful tools. These fuel conversation, the conversations that matter, are dealing basically with three topics. How do you help people as they want to change and move forward? How do you help have conversations that are very much geared around developing employees, and this ability to kind of have meaningful conversations that help people move forward on a project, and to broadly introduce change in the organization. These are useful guides that we have prepared that provide you with some sample questions that you might use, provide you with useful hints about what are the important topics to be covered in such a conversation, and they really become a very constructive framework to help that conversation be better. It helps to guide the conversation, to make sure that it's a two-way dialogue and not a one-way, preachment. But this fuel model is tailored specifically for today's critical conversations.
So if this is interesting to you, we're going to give you a way to get some, to look at those fuel cards, and they're really helpful in having a conversation. Most managers are, they resist having these kind of conversations, I think, Jack, and having a good model really helps, doesn't it?
It does.
Let's talk about another area that helps people increase their resilience, and that's the openness to alternative views. The world has changed, and make an effort to listen to the views that differ from your views. Actively solicit and seek to understand and incorporate alternative perspectives. Cultivate a climate of trust and appreciation and openness to different thoughts and backgrounds. Identify new perspectives that help you move forward and to be more effective. Once you understand alternative views, establish yourself a clear direction and purpose. Where do you get your news? Who do you listen to most often? Are you willing to understand different perspectives? We found that this particular thing can get you stuck. One way of really opening up is something called expressive writing. And expressive writing is where you really try to understand your feelings and emotions and concerns and problems and where those come from. And researchers studied subjects that they asked to do expressive writing for several days. Subjects were evaluated after 6 and 12 weeks, and they were found to be happier than those that wrote about superficial topics. Expressive writing forced subjects to examine their beliefs and test their assumptions, which caused them to form new perspectives. The activity made subjects feel like they had greater control. And, anybody can do this. They can do this kind of expressive writing. We did some research, and this is with 90,000 leaders, and what we looked at was having diverse perspectives. And so we looked at the extent to which leaders were rated low on that, bottom 10%, or very high on that, top 10%. And then we looked at the extent to which the direct reports that they worked with would recommend this organization as a good place to work. What you see is that those leaders who had diverse perspectives had individuals that worked for them that would more likely recommend the organization as a good place to work, which is a significant variable in terms of increasing engagement in the organization.
And finally, the fifth and last of these companion behaviors that we would invite you to consider is you're being trusted by other people. When other people trust you, that makes you feel more important, more powerful, more capable, and therefore more resilient. And so we would invite you to think about, are there people that work with you who maybe have a reason not to trust you? What could you do to improve your relationship with those? Do you feel that you are careful to use very good judgment and being very cautious and deliberate when making decisions? That tends to be one of the factors that elevates trust. Are you making ever promises or commitments where in the end you can't deliver? Might you want to be very careful about doing that as a way of elevating the level of trust that other people have in you? Because as we've seen here from our research, if you look at resiliency on the vertical axis and looking at the 360-degree feedback regarding your rating on trust, what we see is that those who have the lowest ratings on trust have much lower ratings on their perceived resiliency, whereas those who are high have high levels of trust have very high scores on resiliency.
Yeah, when you're trusted, that really is a great thing to help your resiliency. So, what's the impact of this? One of the things we can do is we can simulate the impact by looking at our database. And here's what we discovered. If none of these 5 factors were above average, your resiliency score would be at the 21st percentile. Now, if you did one well, and by well here, above average, so not brilliantly, just above average, your resiliency score doubles, right?
Yeah.
44th percentile. 2 well, it goes almost up to the average, almost to 50. And then 3 well, 55, 4 well, 56. But if you did all 5 above average, and we're not talking high bars here, but if you did all 5 of these, you'd be at the 80th percentile. There is a significant effect to being pretty good at all these.
Yeah.
But there's another approach. And as most of you know, we love the idea of building strengths. So another way to look at it is to say, wonder if I chose one and said, I'm going to be great at this. I'm going to do this really incredibly well. I'm going to be at the 90th percentile. Well, just doing one of those well raises your resiliency score to the 69th percentile, 2 to the 77th, 3 to the 90th. So there is a significant impact for really high performance on just 3 of these things. In fact, if you look at that, you can kind of take 2 approaches: be good at everything, or the second approach is just be good at a couple.
Be really good, at 3.
Yep.
So we would invite you to kind of pause and kind of reflect over these 5 companion behaviors. We hope that maybe something we've said has triggered some thoughts in your mind or has helped you to say, I could do that one better. And so if we would encourage you to choose one that you could work on in the coming weeks and months, and that will help you renew or reinforce your resilience today.
One of the things in thinking about which one to choose, the first thing is effectiveness. Which one of those is below average? And again, getting above average is going to upgrade your resiliency. The other thing is question, which one of those could I be extraordinary at? Which one of those would really raise my resilience? The other question is, what does the organization need me to do? When you do something that helps the organization, their motivation is higher. And so the question is, which one of those 5 things would really benefit the organization and have the greatest impact on your job today? Now, what we're going to provide you is a development guide to help you improve. And again, the real improvement comes when you select something to work on and then you create a very clear, precise, specific development plan. This development guide is going to help you, and at the end of the podcast here, we're going to have a little follow-up survey where we get some feedback. Please fill out that survey, and you can download that guide in that survey. The survey, you need to go, and sometimes this comes up automatically, but if it doesn't, go to this link, bit.ly/mayweb2020, And give us some feedback. We'd love to know what you thought about this particular webcast and any suggestions you have for new webcasts in the future. And you can download your development guide. And if you'd like to get some specifics about those fuel accelerator cards, you can also ask for that there. We believe this topic is important for all employees at every level. We also know that we have a solution that really works. Wouldn't it be helpful for your senior leaders to know the level of resilience in their organization? If you're interested in providing this content in your organization, please reach out to us. We will work with you to plan an implementation that increases the resilience of your employees within the constraints of your budget. Now, once again, please do the post-webinar survey. The link there is bit.ly/MayWeb2020. Thank you so much. Appreciate all you do for us. And if you have any questions, please contact us. Thanks.